Thursday, October 19th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on efforts to stabilize food prices. I would now like to welcome the witnesses for today's panel. For the first hour from Walmart Canada Corporation, we have Gonzalo Guevara, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer. He is joining us via virtual means this morning. Welcome, Mr. Guevara. We're going to allow for 5 minutes opening remarks. I'll give a little take. If you need to be just more than 5 minutes, that's fine, Mr. Guevara. And then we're going to turn over to questions. We'll do that for an hour, and then we have Mr. Weston coming in the second hour. So, Mr. Guevara, over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all members of the committee. Merci de nous donner l'occasion de comparer.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to appear in front of the committee to discuss Walmart's leadership with regards to food prices.
I've been working hard to provide Canadians with EDLP, everyday low prices. At Walmart, we have always been a disruptor within Canadian grocery. This is a fact highlighted in the recent grocery market study by the Competition Bureau, noting how our entry into Canada brought additional choice to consumers and put pressure on competitors to lower prices. We recently launched and posted on our website a study by Deloitte showing that when a Walmart store opens in a major metropolitan area in Canada, it leads to a decrease in the price of a general basket of consumer goods, saving Canadian families in those areas almost $1,000 per year, no matter where they shop. If you shop with Walmart, you know that our EDLP price strategy is what differentiates us from our competitors. Recent news stories have highlighted the significant savings Canadians receive when they shop at Walmart. As I emphasized when I first came to this committee in March, EDLP means providing our customers with consistently low prices on products without having to wait for sales events. This means customers can trust that prices will always be low at Walmart. We're so committed to low prices that a key internal metric of success for us is price gap, the difference between our prices and our competitors' prices. Over the last 18 months, as food prices rose across Canada, we have continued to strive to maintain a material price gap lower than our competitors. Through this period of high inflation, we have been diligent in holding our prices flat where possible and, in some cases, even lowered our prices. This sometimes required us to absorb cost increases or to reject unjustified cost increases from suppliers. To give you a sense of magnitude, last year, Walmart received 6 times the cost increases requests from suppliers compared to pre-pandemic levels. In your last study on food price inflation, you heard from industry experts that numerous factors contribute to grocery price inflation long before the products reach grocers' shelves. As reported by the Retail Council this fall, more than 70% of the final shelf price represents the cost imposed by suppliers, and the vast majority of the remaining 30% goes to normal expenses in running a grocery business. Government policies and regulations, supply chain disruptions, foreign conflicts, domestic labor shortages, and climate change events all have inflationary effects as well. Not only on the cost of goods for suppliers, but also on the grocer's operating costs. This context is important, but ultimately, we know Canadians want solutions. Here are some examples of our company-wide efforts to combat inflation over the last 18 months. We've invested significantly in our Walmart brands, offering 3,000 budget-friendly food and consumable products. Canadians can rely on Walmart brands to save an average of 33% more than national brand prices at our stores. We expanded our 97-cent program, offering an assortment of pantry staples for less than $1 by absorbing significant cost increases from suppliers. Our promotional programs such as Rollbacks and Save Now offer savings of around 10 to 40% on thousands of items. And for this year, during the holiday season, we started these programs even earlier than last year. For Thanksgiving this year, we offered a meal at a price lower than our last year's price. And we launched on December Dollar Days to highlight thousands of items under $10 to help with our customers' holiday needs. In our submissions to both Minister Champagne and to this committee, we provided policy recommendations that could help the government stabilize and even lower food prices. These include a more robust competition bureau, to examine competition throughout the supply chain, including suppliers. Harmonizing regulatory requirements to lower the cost of goods for consumers, developing a supply chain labor strategy, and prioritizing regional development agents to support building Canadian manufacturing capacity in key food sectors, namely pasta, beans, frozen foods, meat packaging, and infant formula. The whole value chain needs to be accountable for lowering food prices for Canadians, from manufacturers, producers, suppliers, retailers, and governments too. As our founder, Sam Walton, said, if we work together, we'll lower the cost of living for everyone. Let me assure you, Mr. Chairman, more than 100,000 Walmart Canada associates work hard every day to fulfill that objective of lowering the cost of living for Canadians. I would be happy to answer any question you may have at this time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gerbera, and welcome to the committee again. And just, I think you've been before a committee before, but if not, you can toggle between English and French in terms of the interpretation as the questions come in. We're going to start with the Conservatives for up to 6 minutes. Ms. Rood, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, sir, for being here today. Sir, as you know, I've been a big supporter of establishing a grocery code of conduct, and we've heard a lot about the code in the news lately, mainly because your company has not agreed to sign on to the code yet. So at this point, the code is voluntary, but without all of the big chains signing on to the code of conduct, you actually risk the provinces mandating the code versus it being voluntary. So I'm just wondering if you could tell this committee why you haven't signed on to the code and what needs to be done in order to get you to sign on to the code.
Thank you very much for the question. And as I said the last time we met, we are heavily involved in discussing the code and trying to understand the different provisions from it. As it shows today, we believe that the code is not in a position for us to commit to signing, and we want to commit to continue to discuss and be involved in the different provisions to make sure that we can have a code that can help consumers have lower prices. As you very well know, in Walmart, having low prices is what we do. So we want to make sure that the code has all of the different provisions and conditions so that we can conduct our business to offer low prices every day for our customers across Canada.
Thank you. Earlier this year, the Minister of the Environment has sought feedback on the development of a pollution prevention planning notice, or P2, for primary food plastic packaging. And I'm just curious if your company participated in those consultations on the proposed plastics ban for fresh food. And could you give this committee an idea of what that will mean to consumers from a retail perspective? Will prices go up for the cost of food if a plastics ban is imposed for fresh food at the grocery level?
First of all, Walmart is actively collaborating with the Environment and Climate Change Canada's consultation on the P2 project. Walmart, we have made the announcement publicly several years ago. We are a regenerative company, and we have very ambitious goals on reusable, recyclable, and making sure that everything that all of the packaging that we use is industrially compostable, and making sure that we commit to those big ambitions of being a regenerative company. In recent discussions with the department, we encouraged to see to continue to discuss these provisions. I would say at this point it's too soon to tell what the impact will be, but certainly there needs to be more discussions on what the impact of such provisions will have in prices.
Thank you. Well, we know the front of pack labeling is going to cost $2 billion. And do you have any idea? I know you said you don't know how much it's going to cost. And at the store level, I understand you're reducing plastic waste, and that's great, very commendable. And I think we're all on board with that. It's just that the plastic ban on the fresh fruit and vegetable industry, do you know what it will do to food costs if all of a sudden food has to come into the store from faraway countries on ships. It sometimes takes weeks to get to the retail level, and that's why plastic is so important for keeping food fresh. But until we have a viable alternative, commercially viable alternative to plastic, what would it cost consumers at your end? Because I can imagine there'd be a lot more food waste at the store level if produce coming in is going to spoil a lot faster without being packaged in plastic to be able to preserve it until it can get to the consumers' homes.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we're assessing, the new conditions. You know that at Walmart we pay very close attention to the supply chain network and the cost, and making sure that we can have the most efficient network as possible. And moving fresh produce and fresh products across all of Canada with geography that we have is complicated in itself. Now, I also believe that having high ambitions on regeneration and having big goals on making this planet better is something that we all should be looking for. So we will try to continue to collaborate on those discussions. And again, I believe that I trust that we will get creative and we will find solutions as we walk through this process. And we will learn a lot to make sure that we all work
The timeline
together.
that the Liberal government is suggesting on the plastics ban, though, do you think that that's feasible?
Sorry, could you please ask
The timeline that the government is suggesting for this proposed plastics ban, is that feasible within 2 years? Yes or no?
It's complicated, but we'll try our best.
The Prime Minister recently asked you to come here, and I'm just wondering what specific recommendations you gave to the government to initiate, and have any of those recommendations been acted upon?
Yeah. So it's public knowledge that we were there several weeks ago, and we had a very, I would say, collaborative conversation on all working together to find ways to lower prices. And so we all brought different ideas and different plans to make sure that we could have a stabilization of prices getting into the holiday season.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rood and Mr. Gerbera. Now we'll turn over to Mr. McDonald for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Gerbera, for being here today. Mr. Gerbera, obviously we've faced a lot of challenges over the last 2 or 3 years, and it was a time when, obviously, when supply chain issues from around the world. But now that we're moving away from the pandemic, and we're still seeing, up until just recently, some price fluctuations, mostly on the higher side. But one of the excuses was during the pandemic and those transportation issues. So I'm wondering, why are grocery prices not coming down along with inflation, along with distancing ourselves from the pandemic and those troubles that we had the past 2.5 years?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. As I said in my opening statement, prices are a function of many variables, right? And even though some parts of the supply chain have been stabilized, not all of them, there's still inconsistency in the level of production of key commodities in different parts of the world. There's still, I would say, geopolitical issues around the world, and those things normally also have an impact on the cost of the supply chain. Certainly, the supply chain is more stable than what it was 2 years ago, but it's still not at the level where we could see that we haven't seen prices go down dramatically. And as you heard me say minutes ago, the price that we have on the shelves is the result of many different costs and prices across the supply chain and the value creation chain.
And I just, back in, I believe it was March, Walmart expressed their willingness to participate in the grocery store code of conduct. But then in October, it seemed to change, and it was reported by the Financial Post that they were hesitant. Can you just, Can you explain the change of heart, I guess, from Walmart's perspective?
Well, in March, I stated here that we were willing to participate in analyzing all of the provisions of the code to make sure that we have the right, I would say, environment to conduct business, producers, aggregators, suppliers, distributors, retailers, to make sure that we can offer our Canadian consumers, in the case of Walmart, the lowest prices possible. And so we have been actively participating in the discussions about the code. It's just that we are not in a position at this time to commit to it. Still want to have more clarity on some provisions.
There's a study out this morning, a Canadian study, basically 2 in 3 Canadians believe grocery store code of conduct is a good idea. And if the grocery stores don't apply by a code of conduct, then government would impose it on retailers, or Canadians will be in favor, up to 70% would impose it on retailers. So I guess you're talking to a room full of politicians who are obviously will be pressured by their constituents. So what do you say to us when we're seeing the hesitation of Walmart to not sign on to the grocery store code of conduct? And how do we parlay that message back to our constituents who have, over the past couple of years, due to all the items and many of the issues that you talked about, facing a lot of challenges, including the price of groceries?
Yeah. Well, I would say that please continue to invite us to these sessions and to help us participate in those discussions because we also, it's in our DNA to have low prices. So we think that if we work together, we will be able to set the provisions to have lower prices in Canada. So the thing that I will ask is that please continue to invite us to those discussions.
Do you think, Mr. Guibero, that we have a monopoly in Canada as it concerns to the big grocery companies?
No.
And do you feel we should be working to introduce further competition in grocery sector?
Well, I think competition is always great. I think it's great for consumers. It makes the industries better. So, we learn a lot from competition around the world. As you know, Walmart operates in many countries, and we've learned a lot from competing in different markets in different circumstances.
And very quickly, Mr. Guibero, and the inflation rate in the U.S., which obviously Walmart has a base, was much higher than it was in Canada over the past number of months, and it fluctuated to some extent. But what are you seeing in the U.S. compared to Canada that we could learn from?
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm only responsible for our Canadian business, so I'm not very well educated so as to speak to what's going on in our U.S. business.
Mr. Guibero.
OK. Maintenant, nous avons M. Parent, 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Now on to Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Guibero, for being with us this morning. I've been listening to you since the beginning of this session. I remember in March, I had the impression that you were very open to participating in the grocery store code of conduct. Perhaps I'm naive, but I thought you had said yes. You told Ms. Rude earlier that the code is not acceptable, and now you're telling Mr. McDonald that we should interpret this by continuing to invite you to this committee to encourage the lowering of prices. But we are inviting you to talk about the grocery store code of conduct, and you're not there. How can you explain to citizens, how can you justify to citizens the fact that you're not participating? You are sabotaging the code of conduct by not participating in it, but you're one of the major players on the market. I want to believe you, but frankly, I'm listening to the discussions this morning, and I do think that there is a credibility issue here. How can you justify this to people who are producing food, to small businesses who work in processing food, and to citizens who are having difficulty doing their groceries? What are the upcoming steps that we can take on to ensure your participation for proper reglementation in the food market? Because that's our goal.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to go step by step on all the points that you covered. So first, I said in March that we wanted to actively participate in the discussions so as to understand it better. And what I said moments ago is that we have actively participated in discussions of the code, and we believe that those discussions are still ongoing. And we have raised our opinions on a couple of points on the code, which we believe are not going to help with either having a better environment for producers and distributors and retailers to have run better businesses or to lower prices. So that's the main reason why we would like to continue to have conversations. Because at the end of the day, we want the same that everybody wants, which is to provide Canadians with low prices. This is what we have been doing for the last 30 years in Canada.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. You're saying that you're actively participating, but what we're hearing is that you don't want to commit in a real way. How do you feel a code of conduct can work in Quebec or in Canada if we don't have everybody participating? Do you think it's realistic to implement it and work towards having better prices for our citizens? You're saying that the code is unacceptable. A code like this has been adopted elsewhere. There's one in Australia and one in the UK. In both cases, the final result was that prices were lowered. How can you tell us that Walmart wants lower prices, but yet you don't want to sign on to this agreement? The majority of retailers agree with this code, so I don't understand your point of view.
Well, I believe that Walmart has been very efficient and very, I would say, strong in delivering lower prices for Canadians without a code of conduct in place. So I don't see the direct relation between having a code of conduct and lower prices, because history tells us for the last 30 years, Walmart in Canada has been able to lower prices in current conditions. And that's what we do. So that's what we will continue to do with or without a code. And so that's why we think that we need to separate whether the code is the direct conduit for lower prices or not, or do we want the code to regulate the relationship between suppliers.
Je m'excuse de vous interrompre, Monsieur Djebara. Le temps est limité.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have limited time. The code has worked elsewhere. That's what I just told you. On another note, I'm going to ask you about the credibility that you have. When you came to us earlier, there had been an investigation on the prices. I asked every CEO of the 5 major companies if they can give us the numbers. You've all said that you're in competition with one another, so you can't. The 5 representatives have told me that they were ready to provide those numbers to the Treasury Board. But a few weeks later, when the report was published, the Treasury Board said that not all of the businesses provided the numbers. Here is my question to you. Did you provide the numbers to the Treasury Board as they asked?
We provided information to the Competition Bureau in the conditions that they were requested, yes.
Toute l'information qui était demandée a été fournie.
All the information that they asked for was provided by you, is that correct?
It is my understanding that we provided what was requested.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Perron.
Thank you, Mr. Perron. Now on to Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for joining us today, Mr. Guevara. In September, the Minister of Industry did make a great deal about the meeting that he had with all of the CEOs to discuss food prices, and, you know, pretty strong commitment from the Liberal government. I guess a straight-up question to you, sir. Did that meeting lead to lower prices in your grocery stores?
Thank you again for the question. And as I've been saying in March and for the last half hour here, at Walmart, we work to lower the prices. That's the way that we go to market. So when we came to Ottawa and had those conversations and those interactions, we committed to continue to work on lowering the prices and running the different programs that we have, which many of which I mentioned, right? So doubling down on.
But Mr. Guevara, to interrupt, but with respect, I want to know: did that meeting actually result in lower prices in your grocery stores? Like the actions following from that meeting in September to where we are now today in December?
Well, yes, I was going to say that we were able to launch several programs which resulted in lower prices. And as I said, we were able to offer a Thanksgiving meal at lower prices than last year. So those are all parts of the way that we go to market so that we can continue to deliver a value proposition for our customers that's based and anchored in low prices.
Mr. Guevara, we live in a country today where approximately 7 million Canadians, a record number, are having to access food banks due to high grocery prices. And, you know, I imagine with a company as large as yours that executive compensation is quite generous, probably for a person in your position. But I think it's fair for us as a committee to ask on the subject of high grocery prices. I know that in my community of Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, a lot of the people who are having to access help are in fact people who have full-time jobs. So they are still, even after working 40 hours a week, unable to go out and afford to feed their families. And so I wanted to know, with respect to the employees that Walmart Canada has, especially for your entry-level folks. I mean, we have data now showing that an average family of four is expected to spend more than $16,000 on food next year. That's a $700 increase. Can you say with certainty, sir, that are any of your employees having to access food banks while they're working at Walmart Canada?
Well, at Walmart Canada, our more than 100,000 associates is the most important, thing that we have. We are a company that we are very proud to say that we have very strong values and we care about our associates. And this year, we were able to launch several programs so that we could help our associates live better. Because as you very well know, our purpose is to help people save money and live better, and that includes our associates. So we were able to launch health programs But
sorry, with respect, Mr. Guevara, that wasn't the question. I wanted to know, because, you know, as the point person for Walmart in Canada, and given the difference that we have between executive pay and employee pay in Canada, which is very well documented, can you say for certainty that no Walmart Canada full-time employee is accessing a food bank in Canada?
Well, we have, as I said, more than 100,000 associates across all of Canada. I couldn't say whether any of them would have to, but I am confident that we have the right conditions for our associates to invest their time and energy with us to grow and develop themselves and grow a career with Walmart. That's what we have done, again, for 30 years in Canada.
But with respect, sir, like, what is your opinion on whether, like, if you did have an employee who's working at your store 40 hours a week, and if they're working in the grocery department and they still can't afford to feed their family on a full-time wage with Walmart Canada, what does that say to you? What's your opinion of that?
Well, that would be something that we would like to address immediately. But as I said, I don't have the knowledge of that situation.
You don't have the knowledge of that situation. Do you not get feedback from your employees?
Yes, 100%. It's just that I didn't get that type of feedback. And,
you know, my colleagues have been talking about how your company is considering backing out of the Grocery Code of Conduct. You've given your reasons in the answers to them. But, you know, a lot of the people on the other side of the equation, the suppliers, the primary food producers, have long complained of arbitrary fees and just a complete unfairness given that the grocery retail sector is so concentrated. Why does it seem that you're trying to avoid accountability and transparency in these discussions?
Accountability and transparency is what we stand for, and that's how we have been conducting business with our supplier partners for 30 years in Canada and more than that across the world. So the only thing I said related to the code is that there's still provisions that, we still have doubts that are going to conduct and provide the environment for all of us to have the right businesses so that we can offer the lowest prices possible to Canadians.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. Thank you very much, Mr. Gabara. We'll now turn to Mr. Epp for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Gerber, for being here. In the meeting that you had with the Minister Champagne, it was stated that he gave direction to the grocery CEOs that they should stabilize prices, but stressed that these actions should not necessarily negatively impact the price that farmers or small suppliers receive for their products. So if you're supposed to stabilize prices, let's start with a basic, some assumptions. Would you agree that there are cost pressures on the supply chain?
Could you please elaborate on the question?
Pressures on the supply. Are there cost pressures on the supply chain?
Well, the supply chain has its natural costs. I just don't know compared to what, to previous times, to the beginning of the year. So the supply chain is a very complex ecosystem, and it's very costly to operate it, and it has many participants, and different participants bear the cost of running the supply chain. Yes.
You've referenced your concerns around the code being that doesn't provide Walmart with a proper environment to achieve the everyday low prices. Well, the allegations are that Walmart has placed that pressure onto their suppliers. So how would you respond to that? Where's the government failing to implement a code that allows you to provide everyday low prices but also treat suppliers fairly?
Yeah, so I don't think that we treat our suppliers other than fairly, in a transparent way, in an arm's length way, and we, as a matter of fact, we pride ourselves for being very good at planning together with suppliers so that we can provide information and we can provide our plans so that they can organize their production lines and organize their production capabilities so as they can cope with our demands in advance. So I think that, look, I'm still new to Canada, but I've been with Walmart for 23 years, and the relationship with our suppliers has been great all over the world, and Canada is not an exception.
Walmart owned Asda in the UK and operated under a system with a grocer code for over 11 years. Successfully, I understand. And if not, please challenge me on that. So what is the problem from this government's handling of the implementation of a grocer code that is giving Walmart issues when you successfully operated with the UK under a grocer code?
Yes, I'm sorry. I even though I've been with Walmart for quite a long time.
You're stretching the credibility of this committee when you say you've been in the business for 23 years. You're co-chairing the grocer code, and you do not know about the UK example? Sorry, please try again.
No, I've never worked for Walmart in the UK, and it would be I would be remiss if I commented on the code of the UK.
Familiar with the code?
Excuse me, sir?
Familiar with the UK or the Australian Code of Conduct while you're chairing a committee that's exploring the Code of Conduct in Canada?
I don't think that I'm chairing any committee.
Chairing.
Sure.
Your company is.
Our company is participating in the discussions of the code. And the people who participate, they have been very well informed and educated on the code for Canada.
In your opening statement, you said the responsibility for delivering lower prices to consumers fell across the entire value chain, including government. What direction did you give back to government to reduce prices for groceries in your meetings with the minister?
Yes. So we have, apart from having talked about all of the plans and programs that we have, we also provided some suggestions to the government in improving, the conditions on the supply chain and making sure that we could have streamlined import processes. All those things would help us bring prices down.
Import process to compete with Canadian, or where Canadian products aren't available. Can you be more specific on what direction you've given this government? I mean, this government has got front of package labeling, which my colleague has raised, $6 to $8 billion. There's carbon tax. There's a whole host of costs that the Canadian system is putting in. You did not raise any of those with the government?
No, we talked about a national supply chain strategy. We talked about transportation and border operations so that we can streamline product flow and deliver better prices for our customers.
That's,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's time. Thank you very much, Mr. Epp. Thank you, Mr. Gerbera. Now we'll turn to Ms. Taylor-Roy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Gerbera, for being here and for participating in this effort with our government. We know it's taking everyone's efforts to try and tackle food price inflation. And I wanted to talk about one of the things that you had referenced, and that also the minister had referenced, which was strengthening or amending the Competition Act to strengthen the Competition Bureau's power. And you said that that was one of your recommendations to the government as well. We currently have a bill, C-56, the Affordable Housing and Groceries Act, which was introduced in September, that we've been trying to get passed in the House of Commons. The Conservatives have been delaying and opposing and doing things to try and slow that down. And I'm wondering if you can comment on how you think this bill or increasing competition and strengthening the Competition Bureau will help bring food prices down for Canadians.
Yes, I have to apologize on this one because I'm not familiar with that provision, but I will make sure that I get very well versed and educated on it so that I can come back to you on some comments on it.
Thank you. And in general, you said that one of the things you think would help was more robust competition, though a stronger Competition Bureau. In what ways do you think that will help bring down grocery prices?
Well, what I said is that competition is good, right? I was not referencing that related to the Bureau. I was referencing to the fact that having more players in a particular market gives consumers more options. And by giving consumers more options, you give them more power to decide. And that's what we want. We like consumers in Canada to have choices. And each of the different players, they will develop their own value propositions so that they can have their choices delivered properly to their target customers. And I think strong competition makes everyone better.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that. And one of the issues we're facing in Canada, as my colleague has said, is the oligopoly power in the grocery sector. And the Grocery Code of Conduct would, in fact, address some of that. You had also mentioned supply chain issues. And one of the things the Grocery Code of Conduct would do is contribute to improving the strength and resilience of Canada's supply chain. So I'm wondering, given that the Grocery Code of Conduct would help, especially independent grocers and some of the suppliers in terms of the power that companies like Walmart have in this industry, why is it that you're not supporting the Grocery Code of Conduct?
Yeah. Well, first, I would have to disagree with the concept of oligopoly, right? I think there's very strong competition in Canada. Every time I travel to the different regions, I see amazing operators, amazing value offering from very, very good operators. And as I said, great competition for us. We learn, we like to compete with those operators. So I think Canada is a very competitive market in that regard. And as it relates to the code, as I said earlier, I hope that we can have the right provisions to provide the environment in a level playing field, making sure that all of the provisions contribute to tighter relationships. But as I said, we already conduct tight relationships with our suppliers. And so that's why we think that we need to make some adaptations to those provisions to make sure that they provide the right environment for us to conduct business.
If you're already making or having those kind of relationships, and it may be that you believe you are, but it seems that most Canadians and many suppliers do not agree with this. And you know, right now, when things are this difficult, and many of my constituents are struggling in this holiday season in particular, it seems that you're not doing everything you could to try and address this problem. And I'm wondering if you agree, are there more things that you could do to try and help bring down grocery prices for those Canadians that are really struggling at this time? You know, profits, executive compensation, they're all pretty robust. But yet, people's household budgets aren't right now able to meet this. So I'm wondering what else you could be doing to try and help Canadians at this time.
Yeah, I would say that I hope that you trust me when I tell you that we're doing everything that we can do to run the tightest operation possible, so to be able to continue to offer the lowest prices in the market, particularly for Canadians to put food on the table during this holiday season and be able to celebrate with their loved ones. And as I mentioned in March, we are far away from the narrative of excess profits. That's not what happened for Walmart. That's not what we do. And we are focused on delivering value for Canadians, particularly in the holiday season, so that, as I said, they can put, you know, a good meal on the table and have the celebration that they all deserve.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. We'll turn now to Monsieur Parent. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Président, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gabera, you said, I hope you trust me when I say that we're working for consumers. We want to, but from the beginning of this session, you've said, for example, that you've provided the information necessary to the Treasury Board, but it still is not clear to me if you provided everything that was asked for. You say that Walmart is involved in discussions for the grocery store code of conduct, but the impression that I get is that the working group, for example, doesn't have a single representative from Walmart. So you're not actually present during that process. I'd like you to explain how you consider that you're participating when you're not around the table. Who are your representatives? What are they proposing? Will you be participating more actively in the future?
Yeah, we will continue to participate actively the way we have been participating, and we have our own representatives in the different forums.
Des représentants au comité de pilotage pour...
There are representatives present right now. Is that what you're saying?
We have a team that it's in constant contact with the different committees and the different forums in which the code is being discussed. And we do that through the RCC, the Retail Canada Council.
Bon, mais Monsieur Djibara, donc c'est pas...
So it's not you directly who is participating. It is the Canadian Council who is there and who is indirectly participating. In order to demonstrate true willingness and good faith, do you not think that it would be more would be better for you to actually be seated around the table and to actively participate in discussions in order to ask for the changes that you require? Because right now, it feels like you're sabotaging the system that we're trying to put in place in order to ensure better prices.
I think we are participating in the best way that we can participate, and doing it through the RCC is the way that we think it's the best.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Gabera, I need to revisit this issue because I think, given the fact that you appeared before our committee in March, you should have had some anticipation that similar questions would come your way. And in March, I did very clearly ask about the salaries, the wages that you pay your frontline employees. And, you know, just given the fact that we do operate in the context, I mean, Ms. Taylor-Roy used the term robust. Robust is certainly an interesting way of describing executive compensation and pay. But I'm just, you know, with respect, sir, I'm a little bit perturbed that you, as the CEO of Walmart Canada, given the fact that we are talking about food price inflation, where we know the stats of so many working people can't afford to even provide the basic necessities for their family. I am a little perturbed that you, as the CEO of Walmart Canada, I mean, I've seen your website. We have seen the documents you've provided this committee. You've certainly made a great show that you care about your employees. But the fact that you, as a CEO, are unaware of whether your employees are having to access the food bank to pull themselves through, I think that would be a bit disconcerting to the Walmart Canada employees who are watching this right now. So again, you know, if we're to take you and other CEOs seriously on this very, very important subject to Canadians, how can we do so when you don't even appear to understand how many of your employees are having to access a food bank or whether they're being compensated appropriately? I mean, if they are being kept in a state of being the working poor, does that not concern you, sir, that you don't actually have an accurate number on that?
Well, first of all, I think we have a very good understanding of what's going on with our associates. We measure that. We have, as you know, as I mentioned before, an open door policy where everyone can bring their concerns to anyone in the company, and we have a very, very clear understanding of our associates' engagement, our associates' morale, and of our associates' concerns. Where I answered that I didn't know, it's because it wasn't brought to my attention the fact that we could have associates in the situation that you just described.
Thank you to you both. We'll go to Ms. Rood for 5 minutes, then we're going to go to Mr. Lewis, and I'm going to exercise a couple questions at the end. Go ahead, Ms. Rood.
Thank you. Mr. Garbera, we talked about fees and fines the last time that you were before this committee in March, and we've heard you push back today on unjustified supplier increases, but you never talk about unjustified penalties to small suppliers, to farmers, producers. So, and ultimately, when these fines are brought on to suppliers, it translates to increased prices for consumers, and that is perhaps why some suppliers are pushing back and asking for price increases. So I'm wondering if you would table with this committee the total fines and fees charged to your suppliers in 2023.
I don't have that information. I apologize.
It's okay if you don't have it today, sir. We'd be happy if you could table it with this committee at a later date. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, with regard to the code, you said that there's provisions that you're concerned about, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what provisions you're particularly concerned about, because we've already had other retailers here who weren't concerned with some of the provisions in the code. So what are those provisions that you're concerned about in the code as to why you won't sign on to this grocery code, why you're holding out?
Yeah. First of all, let me just say that I think it's great that we, in the same industry, we have participants that agree on certain things and others that don't. I think that's how healthy this industry is, right? And so I celebrate that. And as I mentioned earlier today, I think there are some provisions that provide a level playing field in the conditions in which suppliers and retailers will have to operate, and I don't think that's right. There's provisions that create bureaucracy and costs that will inevitably end up on shelf prices. And so I think as long as we could solve for that, we will have a great code of conduct, and we will be able to continue to conduct transparent and arm's-length relationships, all of the participants of the industry.
So there's nothing in particular, it's just a bunch of things that you're not agreeable to when other retailers are. There's not one specific thing you can tell us that you don't agree with.
Well, there's a combination of things that put us in a position to think that it's an unlevel playing field, and there's a lot of bureaucracy that will create cost, and no one wants a necessary cost into the system.
Okay, Mr. Garbera, I'm just wondering if you could tell us how much your company spends on carbon tax across your company, because we know that that does contribute to increased costs at the retail level for consumers. And you mentioned you have a network of stores across the country and you have your own trucks, and I'm sure you pay a lot in carbon tax. I'm wondering if you can and would like to comment on how much that increase has cost your company.
Yeah, well, indeed, we have more than 400 stores across all of Canada, and we have our fleet transporting products from coast to coast to coast. But I don't have the number on the tax, so I will have to, come back to you on that one.
That's great. Would you be able to table that statistic with the committee?
Yeah, provided that it's information that it's not confidential, I think that we will be in a position to do it. I'll have to check, of course.
Thank you. Mr. Garbera, I recently read an article where a spokesman from your company was talking about some of the things that your store is doing to help consumers with inflation and the affordability of groceries. And we know people are really struggling out there with record numbers of people using food banks. And it kind of struck me odd that what was in this article is your company has actually implemented something where customers can buy their groceries on a payment plan, and you're offering 4 equal payments over 6 weeks to help customers afford their essentials every day. And while that might seem great in the first place, why can't your customers afford to buy food at your store if you're claiming that you have the lowest prices out there of any retailer? I find this fascinating that we would have to go to this. I'm wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think you're referring to our Buy Now, Pay Later program, which is tailored, and the objective of this program is for our customers to have better access to durable goods. In no way we would like anyone to be in a position to finance their very, very highly needed essentials that they will consume in a couple of days and bear the burden of the financial cost for several months. So the program is tailored for durable goods.
Thank you very much, Ms. Root. We'll now go to our final participant, so to speak. Mr. Lewis, over to you, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Garbera, CEO of Walmart Canada, for being here as well. It's an important conversation, and Canadians are concerned by the behavior of major grocery chains, given its highly consolidated sector here in Canada. The reason we're here is that Canadians want transparency, accountability, and a commitment to fair practices in the face of concerns about high food inflation and potential consumer gouging. That's what we're hearing. So you've already mentioned it a few times. We talked about strengthening the Competition Bureau here in Canada, and it sounds like you agree with your quote. I think it was originally from Sam Wall. Working together will make life better for everyone. So there exists that consideration that strengthening the Competition Act to give the Bureau more power to take action, allowing the Bureau to compel production of information, to conduct effective and complete market studies. I just wanted to get you on record again saying that you're agreeing that competition is good and you're agreeing to give more powers to the Competition Bureau.
Yeah, I think it's very important that I make this clarification again. I think I had to do it moments ago. I think competition is great, not giving more power to any competition regulator, right? So competition is great for everyone participating in the industry and for consumers, which is not to say that giving more power to any competition regulation is what I would support. I hope that I'm clear with that.
I do hear you. You're saying competition is good, but you want to make sure it's voluntary. And I think maybe an example of that would be the Grocery Code of Conduct, which right now is voluntary, and it's a tangible way of bringing more fairness and transparency and stability to our grocery sector and our supply chain. We're reviewing all the options. We had major grocery coming to the table, and we're talking about getting along and working on a voluntary basis. But that doesn't seem to be working now. So the fairness, the transparency, stability, do we have to enforce those things?
As I said many times since March, I've learned that in Canada we have fairness, transparency, arm's length negotiations, very robust planning capabilities, clarity in the communication cycle. I have been meeting with several suppliers over these months, and I don't think Canada is in a different situation that I've seen in other markets. So I think I've been exposed now to the industry, and I think we have great conditions for everyone to conduct our businesses.
To say that the grocery code of conduct is more than just the consumer, we're also talking about your relationship with the suppliers, because we've done a previous study here in the Agriculture Committee and found that there are issues with the major grocers and suppliers, and we want to make sure they're treated fairly too. So I think that's something we need to continue to talk about as we move forward. But I did want to ask some other solutions. Something we're hearing from our communities is that sales or discounts sometimes only happen if people buy in bulk, 2 or more products. But that's not reasonable for everyone. In order for customers to get that reduced price, sometimes they have to buy more than they need, and may not be able to afford that expense outlay, or the food could go bad before they get to use it. So when there's a sale, the customers don't get the benefit of a reduced price unless they buy more than they need. So is this a practice that you would consider offering the same price for a single product?
Yeah. So again, remember that we are fanatic about everyday low prices. So we like to keep prices low across the board in a consistent way. But there's an interesting point on what you're saying. If our data says that the average basket takes, let's say, 3 units of yogurt, it would be perfectly fine to promote 3 units at a price. It would be bad to promote 6 units at a price. But 3 units at a price, it will be fine because that's the average consumption per basket, right? So we are very careful in not pushing our customers to have to make out-of-pocket investments to reach a certain price. The essence of EDLP is to stay away from that. So we wouldn't do that, what you just described.
Final question in the last 20 seconds. In that same vein, would you consider harmonizing unit prices, addressing the consumers' challenges when they're facing different items between different stores, basically saying apples to apples? Would you be in favor of that, the grocery sector in general?
Sorry, what do you mean by harmonizing unit prices?
The price per unit, as opposed having that more on display. Other countries are doing that.
We have the price per unit, price per liter, price per 100 ounces. All that is displayed in our pricing.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Guevara. Look, I'm going to just take a couple minutes here. We had Mr. Medline before the committee on Monday, and he was very transparent about the margins in the grocery sector in relation to the amount of money that's being made above and beyond cost, gross margins. Could you provide for this committee what Walmart Canada's gross margin is in its grocery store explicitly? Do you have that number?
So again, sometimes people talk about margins in different ways. So if you could help me be more specific on what you mean when you say margins.
On the money that you make above and beyond your cost in grocery stores specifically. I would appreciate Walmart would have pharmaceuticals as well, but I'm wondering if you could either provide a number to this committee. I mean, as the CEO of Walmart Canada, is it 2% margin? Because there's a lot made on the amount of money that grocery companies make. It's a big target. We're hearing from Mr. Weston next. I'm sure he'll remind us that, of course, he'll say, look, even if you took all profit away from groceries, you're talking $1 or $2 on a $100 grocery bill. What's your margin? Do you have it, and how has it changed over time?
So as you know, I can't disclose the specific numbers, but I will echo what everybody has been saying, that grocery margins are very low margins. And we can access public information from all of the retailers around the world, and you will see how slim margins we have in this industry.
I'm interested in your program where you talked about buy now, pay later. Look, I can appreciate in the given context right now where people are struggling to be able to pay for some of those essentials, that program has merit. What interest do you charge on people in terms of them paying? Is that something that the Walmart will cover? Is there a marginal interest rate? How much interest? Let's say I went into Walmart and bought groceries today and it was $100. and I didn't have the money to pay for it, and you said in 2 weeks later I can pay it back, am I paying $100 back in 2 weeks, or am I paying 103, 110? Like, what's the interest rate on that?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's very important for us to highlight that the Buy Now, Pay Later program is for durable goods. We don't want our customers, and as a matter of fact, we're working on even technology to prevent that from happening. We are not tailoring that program for our customers to buy essentials. We want our customers to be able to have better access by financing, softening the out-of-pocket impact so that they can buy durable goods. Microwave that went wrong, a refrigerator that went wrong, a TV, they want to treat themselves with a new TV. So those are the kinds of items where we would like, there are high-ticket items that we want to offer the options for our customers to buy now and pay later and have a lesser burden into their out-of-pocket. That's all there is.
Okay, so it's not groceries then, it's durable products.
Durable products, we call them general merchandise products, non-food products.
Okay. Last piece is you mentioned red tape and bureaucracy. With all due respect, you weren't that specific in terms of what exactly. Ms. Rude tried to take you down a line of questioning to really try to flush out what the issues are with the Grocery Code of Conduct. But let me ask you this. If industry can't figure it out, we saw statements today from Minister McCauley and Minister Lamontagne basically saying we'll explore all options possible. In your view, is it better that industry comes up with a solution and we find a pathway, or that government regulates it for you and you may not get as much influence on that decision as you'd like?
Yeah, I trust that as an industry we will come with a solution.
Thank you. Colleagues, that takes us to the end of our first hour. We're going to suspend briefly. Let me thank you, Mr. Guevara, for coming before the committee and answering questions. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you. Colleagues, will briefly suspend, and we'll get Mr. Weston lined up, and we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
To our camera folks, but we'll have to ask you to leave. Look, second hour, we've got up Mr. Weston. And Mr. Weston, you've since changed roles. You're now the chairman. I guess you were chairman and CEO, and now you're chairman. But thank you for coming back before the committee. We have an hour here, colleagues. I'm going to get right to it. So I'll start with Mr. Weston for a 5-minute opening remark. What's that?
It's just
get your translation.
It's just
okay.
a little tangled.
Okay, perfect. I'll let you untangle, and then you have a 5-minute opening remarks, and then we're going to get right to questions. I almost skipped over that. What's that? Yeah, I almost forgot about your 5 minutes, Mr. Weston. You have 5 minutes for opening remarks. I was going to turn it right over to my colleagues who I know are eager to want to ask questions, but we'll allow 5 minutes for you for opening remarks. And again, thank you for being back before the committee. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. So hello and bonjour, Chair and Committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you again and to discuss the steps that Loblaw is taking to help Canadians. While it appears that the peak of inflation is behind us, we know that increased food prices still have a real impact on Canadians as they try to put meals on the table while balancing their budgets. And we know that that's harder today when almost everything has rapidly increased in price, including housing, heating, and fuel, leaving less income for essentials like food. It's an appalling statistic that almost 80% more Canadians turned to food banks this year compared with 2019. We all need to do more to help. And this is a responsibility that we take very seriously and one that Loblaw's entire team continues to work on. Over the last 2 months, we've been an active participant in discussions with government, sharing ideas and providing details about our specific actions. We outlined our recent letter to the committee. As we outlined in our recent letter to the committee, we focused our efforts on delivering additional value across a basket of 35 items and categories that matter most to customers, like milk, butter, eggs, and chicken, where we are meaningfully lowering prices. These critical items are present in almost every grocery basket and make up nearly 10% of our sales. We're delivering these savings through the pricing and promotional programs that customers understand and respond best to. They are making a difference. Let me give you an actual example. On a product like chicken drumsticks, the cost to us has risen by 30% since 2019, but the investments that we're making in lowering prices means that the average price for this product over the last 12 weeks has been 4% lower than 4 years ago. This is on top of super low everyday pricing in our discount stores, where we routinely sell products like bananas, sugar, and milk, all below cost. We compete every day with other major grocery chains, global multinationals like Walmart and Costco, regional chains, local independents, and online companies like Amazon. Canada is an extremely competitive grocery market. We know if we do not provide real value, customers will and do shop elsewhere. Since the beginning of September, we've saved customers even more money through our PC Optimum points and members-only pricing, and through programs like retro pricing at No Frills and the Maxi Merci campaign in Quebec that has served more than 2.2 million people. We're also the only national grocer that offers price match in all of our discount stores. Each year, more than 10 million customers take advantage of this program, and in just 2 months, we matched competitors' offers to the tune of $38 million. Finally, in addition to those immediate steps, we are changing the way we invest in communities by opening more discount stores in more markets. By the end of next year, we will have added nearly 70 new or converted discount stores, reaching an additional 2 million Canadians with the best combination of quality and value available in the country, on average 20% cheaper than a non-discount store. These efforts are making an impact. We watch closely the prices in our stores and inflation levels at our checkout. Compared to the StatsCan food CPI of 5.4 in October of 2023, our internal inflation number is 5.1%. And when we look at products that are actually purchased in our stores, our internal inflation today is already below the overall CPI. We are doing our part to help stabilize food prices for our customers. But as we've stated time and time again, we cannot do this alone. Recent studies from the Bank of Canada and the Competition Bureau have proven that grocery stores are not the reason for high food prices. And as such, we are unable to unilaterally resolve the inflationary pressures. As I explained to this committee earlier this year, for every $25 in groceries sold, we earn just $1 in profit. That means that even if this industry had zero profits, a $25 grocery bill would still cost $24. It's important to stress that the suppliers, who make up 70 to 80% of the price of products, remain largely absent from this effort. And unfortunately, we have not yet seen a manufacturer come forward with a proposal to decrease cost. And in fact, many of them are already signaling or submitting higher than expected cost increases for next year. There is some good news. Food prices are definitely stabilizing, and we expect that to continue. But we are concerned that the Grocery Code of Conduct could slow down this momentum. When I was here with you 6 months ago, I voiced my support for a fair, balanced, and reciprocal code. I also cautioned that a one-sided code that removes a retailer's ability to hold vendors accountable to their commitments would risk higher prices. And while the principles of the code as it's currently set up are sound, when you get into the details, there is significant risk of higher prices and empty shelves. Now, there's clearly a lot of passion around this subject, so to inform this discussion, we have provided the committee members with the latest copy of the code and the details of our concerns. But I would like to share one specific example. The current drafting of the dispute resolution principle in the code gives manufacturers the ability to escalate disputes around cost increases to a yet-to-be-defined third-party mechanism. In Australia, that third-party mechanism has supported increases in costs in essentially 100% of cases. If that had happened in Canada, since the beginning of last year, it would have resulted in $750 million in additional inflation pressure for consumers. That risk is very real and on its own is a reason for pause. There are 3 other specific areas of risk in the code, including Section 2.5, 3.4, and 4.4. And we've laid them out for this committee in the material provided. I'm happy to offer a more detailed perspective on any of them, but in our judgment, each one increases the likelihood of higher retail prices or less product on the shelves, directly or indirectly. I must say I'm perplexed as to why other industry leaders are making such confident claims about the code's ability to stabilize prices, when it was never intended to do so. The conversations about the code began years before inflation actually took hold. A variation of this code did not help stabilize prices in the UK, in Australia, or Ireland over the last 2 years, where none of which have lower food price inflation than Canada. I'm worried that amidst our collective enthusiasm to deliver meaningful relief for Canadians on the cost of food, we are traveling in hope towards something that will do exactly the opposite simply because it sounds good. So I would urge this committee to look closely at the details. We completely agree that there is an opportunity to improve the way that retailers and manufacturers work together, and that there are certain things we can do differently ourselves. We are taking action on this front already. A few weeks ago, we announced our new small supplier program, delivering concrete benefits to over 1,000 manufacturers to reduce the cost and risk of doing business with us. Either way, we will do more. We absolutely remain open to the right version of the code, but we simply must not do it at the expense of our customers. Loblaw's purpose is to help Canadians live life well. We'll always be ready to do our part and come to the table for these conversations, and we will stand up for customers even if it is unpopular. We welcome the committee's continued interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weston. We'll turn now to questions. I have Ms. Rood first for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Weston, for being here today. Mr. Weston, you just noted that the code doesn't affect the numbers for consumers, but there's a report that came out today that would say otherwise. And I'm just wondering if you could tell this committee, as you know, I've been a big proponent of this code from the beginning because I believe that it's going to help not only consumers but suppliers to have lower prices and be able to pass those lower prices on to consumers. So could you tell this committee why you won't sign the code and what needs to be done to get you to sign the code? Yes, please.
Yeah, so Yeah, so we absolutely will sign the code. We've always said that we would sign the code. We just need to sign a code that doesn't increase the risk of higher food prices to Canadians. And as the code is currently drafted, our strong conviction is that it will do so. As I mentioned before, the code was set up, with the intent of improving the relationship between manufacturers and retailers. It was never designed, to lower food prices, and we're in a very different circumstance right now, where there are food prices that are increasing, have been increasing across the board. This idea that grocers are the problem, I think, is part of what is shifted the dialogue into somewhat the wrong place. I've got a list here of manufacturers, all of whom have claimed that price increases have been the driver of their excellent performance over the last 12 months. That includes Pepsi in their quarterly results, Nestle in their quarterly results, Kraft Heinz in their quarterly results, Procter & Gamble, the list goes on. These are large multinational manufacturers, and the Code of Conduct has a set of clauses in it that reduce the grocer's ability to negotiate hard against those vendors. We were able to push back on 18% of what we believed we considered to be unjustified cost increases across the industry last year. Based on the way the code is drafted today, we will be severely restricted in terms of our ability to do that. It's very plain to see in that circumstance specifically that will lead to higher cost increases from manufacturers, and that will lead to higher prices for consumers.
Thank you. I'm just curious why Loblaw has a problem with the section of the code that deals with the need to get reliable food to our independent grocers and people who live in rural and remote communities in particular.
We don't have a problem with any aspect of the code that that suggests that whatsoever. One of the other examples, in the code is something that we charge a compliance charge for manufacturers if they fail to deliver to our stores the products that they agreed to deliver. And the way to think about that is that we will develop up an ad, a promotion. Let's say we're going to put an item on for a 30% discount. And we agree with the manufacturer that they will provide the forecasted amount of products for that ad. And if they are unable to deliver that quantity, which we are planning for to benefit customers, then there's a compliance charge for that failure to deliver. And if we take away the ability to hold that vendor accountable, then what we're concerned about is that the customer or that the manufacturer will not give us 100% of the committed order. And as a result, we will disappoint the customer because we won't have enough product for them in the store in that given week at that price. And the next time, we won't be able to put it on such an aggressive price because we'll be afraid of running out. That's another very tangible example of how the way the code is drafted, the principle is fine. The way it's drafted is the issue that we have concerns about.
Thank you. Sorry, I know time is running short. Mr. Weston, the produce industry has the DRC, and you are a member of the produce of that. And the dispute resolution model being discussed is similar to the DRC system with education as a first step. So why does this not work for you, but not in a code? It works for you, but not in the code model.
It hasn't been finalized, the drafting of this in the code. It's just an open, couple of sentences. And as I've mentioned before, multiple times, Australia, the UK, Ireland have been, quoted as sort of the models that we're trying to replicate with that dispute resolution system. And in Australia, as an example, it is woefully inadequate, based on our research and our understanding of the way it works. So again, to be clear, we're not saying no, we're not saying we don't want to sign the code. We're simply pointing out that right now there are 4 areas where the drafting is not specific enough or it's framed in such a way that it's going to put the customer at risk. And I don't think any of us should be taking those kind of risks at this point. We've got an opportunity to get this code right. Let's make sure that we take the time to do it.
What specific recommendations did you ask the Liberal government to initiate when you were here in Ottawa a couple weeks back, and have any of those recommendations been acted upon?
Yeah, I do. So a number of recommendations. Number one was to review front-of-pack labeling requirements. There is a significant incremental cost every time you have to change a packaging plate, ingredients or nutritional labeling and that sort of thing. We think there's an opportunity to use digital QR codes as an alternative so that instead of changing the packaging every time, we just have to update the information on the QR code. Right now, the front-of-pack labeling requirements are not going that way. That's a meaningful incremental cost. We've suggested a pause on the P2 plastic proposal to reconsider the cost impact of that proposal to Canadians. We lead the way in Canada when it comes to plastic packaging reduction. We're very bullish on the technological solutions that are ultimately going to be available, to solve some of these problems. But right now, they don't exist. And I've seen numbers, astonishing numbers, that suggest that the P2 proposal could add as much as $6 billion of incremental cost to the value chain. So we've really got to think carefully about accelerating that one until we know that we have solutions that the industry can properly take on board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weston. Thank you, Ms. Rood. We'll now turn to Mr. Drouin online for up to 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here today for the second time in less than a year. Mr. Weston, Loblaws participated in the drafting of the Code of Conduct. Is that correct?
So we've been participants in the process. We were not on the working committee.
D'accord. Et donc vous avez participé.
So you participated in some way. I'm just having difficulty with something, and other colleagues echoed this. All of the parties that are here, so Conservatives, the Bloc, the NDP, the Liberal Party, we all agree that there should be a grocery store code of conduct. I don't understand Walmart's and Loblaw's strategy. At the 11th hour, at 11:59, right before midnight, there seems to be pressure on other colleagues. There are three other retailers who have absolutely no issue with the problems you mentioned. Why are you raising those now? And how come the other retailers don't seem to have the same issues? Do you think that they've interpreted this differently?
So the most important thing, and I think the thing that we're all here to discuss, certainly the purpose of this session, is what can we do to lower the cost burden, on Canadians, especially when they are, shopping at the grocery store. As I've said before, the Code of Conduct, is not specifically designed to do that. So we're trying to force fit the code, into a different outcome. And we have been participating in this process. We have been giving feedback on this process. We have shared the four, points of concern multiple times over the last 18 months. The idea that we've dropped this on, the process at the last minute is completely untrue. I shared it specifically, in terms in my remarks here 6 months ago. We provided the same very strongly worded perspective, in our meetings with the Ministry of Industry in October, and and it's falling on deaf ears. We're getting no response. We're being told no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. And so, in the last couple of weeks, we have had to take a firmer position. We are here being held accountable for high food prices that are not the direct responsibility of the grocery industry. And now you're asking us to sign on to something that we believe in our bones is going to do the opposite of what other people say that it's going to do. And they won't even talk to us about it anymore.
Je comprends très bien.
I do understand, but here's the issue. Your perspective is not the one adopted by the 5 major retailers in Canada, and they have 80% of the market. It would be something else if they were all unanimous in and agreed with your opinion, but it's not the case. So 3 other retailers say that they disagree with your position. It's 3 against 2. So you understand that we have certain doubts and we're concerned about the perspective you're presenting. I also understand that there are processors who also have a big share of the market, but that's why the code of conduct is important, because it would make things a bit more balanced for small retailers, and you'd be able to be on the same level playing field. What you're presenting, my fear is that other provinces will just go ahead with their own code of conduct. Is Loblaws ready to operate in an environment with various regulatory codes that vary between different provinces?
Look, the best outcome, without question here is a code that we can all sign on to. There are some other retailers who are clearly enthusiastic supporters of the code. I'm not sure if they have spent time, in the detail of the drafting or not, because it is perplexing, to us that they are as enthusiastic about the fact that this code, they think that this code is going to reduce prices. It may have to do with the fact that they are not as well developed in the discount retail space as we are, as Walmart is, and as, for example, Costco is. Discount stores depend on their ability to drive a hard bargain with their manufacturing counterparts. And yes, we have to do our absolute best to support small and medium-sized manufacturers and growers in this country. That's what our small supplier program is concrete action of actually doing. The thing about this code is it's enabling the largest multinationals in the world, who are 10 times larger than Loblaw on its own, to it's a position where we're not able to negotiate as firmly against unjustifiable cost increases. So yes, we are. This code will and should, help with small manufacturers and growers, but at the same time, it's going to unlock and empower, the largest multinational manufacturers in the world, who are already standing in the way of lower food prices for Canadians. That is a real challenge. As I said before, the code may sound good, but if you don't look into the detail, then we are going to end up in the opposite place of what this code intends to do.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. Thank you, Mr. Weston. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes.
On to Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Weston, for being here today. I've been listening to you from the beginning, but I'm having a hard time following what you're saying. You're saying that this code cannot work. You have some doubts, but you're not represented at the working group. How can you be here and say that you participate in the process when you're not even on the steering committee? If you were, would you be able to propose the changes that you want? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So I think the key focus here is to figure out ways to reduce the impact of inflation on Canadians. As I've said before, the way the code is currently drafted, it certainly doesn't do that. The way it was set up is we were prohibited from being, participants in the steering committee. I'm not exactly sure.
Respectfully, my time is short. How can you justify questioning the negotiation of the code of conduct, given that the majority of retailers are negotiating in good faith when you are not even at the table? Now you're saying that we need to lower prices for consumers. Of course, I agree with that. But why aren't you at the table? Why aren't you involved in the discussions and negotiations and haven't been from the beginning?
So we've been providing our feedback, but we were excluded, from the working group. We did not participate in the working group. We did have the opportunity of consultation. We provided our perspective over and over again through these consultations. And by the way, we're the first people to actually publish the language of the code, for this committee to look at and for others to look at. Previously, I don't know what evidence was provided by the advocates for the code on how it was going to lower food prices. I don't think they presented any. We're trying very hard to prevent very simple, very clear evidence, that there is substantial risk here. And this feedback, was not listened to in this process.
Monsieur Weston, là, vous me dites que...
Mr. Weston, you're saying that you were excluded from the working group. What I've received as information is that you just weren't there. Who excluded you? Who did that? The Canadian Council of Retailers didn't do that, surely, because Sobeys, Metro, and the Independent Grocers Association are at the table. You are sabotaging, from what I understand, a process in which you haven't even participated fully from the beginning. As Mr. Drouin said, you are going to provoke the implementation of more complex and complicated regulation. Who excluded you from the working group?
It was the way that the process was set up. Was that Sobeys and Metro would be the representatives of the industry on the working group, and that's fine. We've been trying to provide feedback all the way through, of our concerns, and we're continuing to provide that feedback.
Vous me dites Sobeys et Metro sont vos...
You're saying that Sobeys and Metro are representing you at the working group, but Metro agrees. So if they're your representatives, then how come they're in agreement? Something doesn't add up. I don't understand. There's just something that does not add up in what you're saying. Earlier, you mentioned that it's important for you to keep your ability to impose fees on producers. This is one of the factors that explains that there are negotiations for this code. I don't want to disrespect you, Mr. Weston, but here's what I'm hearing. Well, have you ever been at that table in good faith and participated, or are you intending on keeping the practices that you've had for years now?
So we continue and have been throughout this process engaged and active in good faith. We were not on the working committee, but as I said, we have been providing our feedback and our perspective all along. We have senior executives who have been participating in this process. The point that I'm simply making is that our feedback is not being heard, and that is troubling for us. Maybe Sobeys and Metro operate their businesses in a different way. I know that they have fewer discount stores. So they may not be as focused on, on the lowest possible prices for Canadians, as we are. But let me give you, if I may, just a brief explanation of how these compliance charges work. The way they work is that we set an expectation that we're going to receive a certain amount of product at a certain time in a certain way. And there is a charge for that. 60% of the time, we make exceptions to those charges based on good faith conversations with our manufacturers.
Monsieur Weston, ces processus-là, je les comprends bien.
I understand those mechanisms. That's what we want to regulate with the code. You're saying that the code of conduct didn't limit inflation in Australia or in the UK in recent months, and that there's still been inflation in recent months. When the codes of conduct were introduced in those countries, there was actually very positive impacts on grocery store prices. So that can't be denied. We strongly believe that a grocery store code of conduct in Canada would be good for consumers. What are your thoughts?
So, as I said before, the most important thing here is that we don't do the opposite of the intention of this committee, which is put in place, conditions that lead to higher prices from the largest multinational manufacturers in the world. So, it's important to separate that risk from how do we effectively support Canadian growers and manufacturers. And this is one of the elements that hasn't been effectively addressed, in the code today. So, and so we have put very constructive solutions forward. At each point in this, we're not saying no. We're saying, look, there are some important adjustments and tweaks that could be made to this code that we believe offer the best of both worlds. And I'd be happy to give you examples of that, at some other point. We have heard nothing, from our counterparts in this conversation about any accommodation for these risks. They just say, no, they're not real. But they are real. And there is, I don't know where, with all due respect,
Mr. Weston, I apologize. I wanted to give you a little bit of time, but I have to make sure I'm managing the time for my colleagues. So I gave you a few extra seconds, but I got to go to Mr. McGregor now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Weston. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Industry Minister Champagne, they had said that all the CEOs had agreed to stabilize food prices after the meeting in September. But following that, Metro CEO Eric Laflèche said that it did absolutely nothing to change prices. So we have conflicting accounts, and I want to know from you, who is telling the truth? Is it Metro or the Liberal government?
I can't speak to Metro's perspective. I know that
he makes that statement that it did absolutely nothing. Are you in agreement with that, or with the Liberal government's contention?
In our case, that meeting resulted in materially lower prices in the 35 items and categories, that we communicated here to this committee. But it's important also to note, and I think the message that Eric was perhaps trying to communicate is that we have been making collective efforts as an industry for months and months and months. And we don't want this to turn into, well, the only reason food prices are lower is because...
I don't want to dwell too much. I just wanted to get an initial answer to that first question. Now, you are the former CEO responsible for Loblaw. You've changed positions. But we do live in a country where we have 7 million Canadians, a record number, having to access food banks due to high grocery prices. What do you say to that astounding figure, and do you know how many of them might be Loblaw employees?
It's any way you look at it, the affordability challenges faced, in this country, whether it's food, gas, electricity bills, or the, or mortgage prices. There is enormous pressure on Canadians, and 7 million, 2 million, 4 million. It's all too many people.
But do you know how many of your employees are having to access food banks?
I don't know specifically how many employees access food banks, but I'm sure it is a material number.
Okay. I think why this is such an emotional issue is because your stores sell the necessities of life, whether it's food, drink, or medicines. And, you talked about the fact that you expect food prices to stabilize over the next year, but we just got a report saying that in 2024, they expect the annual cost for a family of 4 to go up to over $16,000, which is a $700 increase. So a lot of families, I think, in my region would look at that and say, well, that's not really stabilization. So they look at that. That's the reality for their life. And in your last quarter, you posted, the Q3, you posted a $621 million profit. The same quarter of the year before, $556 million. So now you've come to this committee, you've explained, your position on food price inflation. But when people in my riding are going through these incredible challenges, food prices are expected to go up again next year. It seems like ordinary Canadians are shouldering all of the hurt and all of the struggle, while corporations like yours, in the midst of all of this pain and struggle, are still posting record profits. Now, you may argue it's not coming from food, but you're still taking money from Canadians in other areas, and that's leaving them probably less to spend on food elsewhere.
So this is an important point, because as a grocery store business, as any private enterprise, our goal is to grow our business. It's to increase the number of customers. It's to invest in communities, to build more stores, to increase the amount of sales. And if we can increase the amount of sales, then the profit of the enterprise goes up. So there should be record profits in a way with a successful company every year, year after year. that is not an indication of bad practice. It's not an indication of some sort of profiteering. It's just an indication of a business operating exactly the way that it should. And when you think about a grocery industry at 3% of the total value of a grocery basket being profit, that's the smallest number in the large industries across Canada. So there's no evidence at all of profiteering or excess. But I do understand that Canadians are feeling this pressure, and they look at these big numbers and they think to themselves, "Gosh, if that company would not make so much profit, our food prices would go down."
Thank you, Mr.
But that's
Weston.
not the way that it would actually work.
I have limited time, and I want to get one more question. And I think it's fair in these times when so many are struggling, including many employees in your stores, to talk about executive compensation, because the gulf between what top executives earn and what employees earn has turned into a chasm, frankly. Now, your total compensation in 2022 was $11.7 million, which was nearly a $1.1 million increase from the previous years. I was wondering if you could explain to Canadians and probably to your employees why you make 431 times more than your average employee. Because, I have a quote from Unifor. The local at one of your stores said, quote, "Loblaw workers are fed up with the out-of-control disparity between their wages, the company's enormous profits, and the high cost of living. You know it's bad when workers at Canada's largest grocery store are struggling to afford their own food, even at discount stores like No Frills." How do you respond to that, Mr. Weston?
Well, first of all, I am extremely empathetic to the circumstances that Canadians face who are struggling to put food on their tables, and all of the cost pressures that they're experiencing are contributing to that. And so that's why we're focused as an enterprise on finding ways to lower prices. In the last 12 weeks alone, we've invested $438 million in lower prices. As I mentioned, many of those prices are lower than they were 4 years ago. I get that my compensation is a big number. It certainly it's a big number, and I understand that completely. It's reasonable in the context of other executive pay.
431 times your average employee is reasonable?
Mr. McGregor, you're at time, so I appreciate it. In fact, I gave you a few extra seconds. We'll go to Mr. Epp now for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Weston, for being here. I'm going to parse a bit your statement around support for the code or the effect of the code. If I understand you correctly, you're saying that the existence of a code does not lower grocery prices. Would you agree that the existence of a code would lower relative prices in the absence of a code, as has been the experience in the UK, Ireland, Australia?
Could you maybe just clarify what you mean by relative prices?
The prices that they would have prices would be lower than they would have been otherwise given other external factors.
No, I don't believe that's the case, and there is no evidence that I have seen, nor that we've been able to get hold of in the UK, in Australia, or in Ireland that suggests there's a relationship between the code of conducts that were implemented in those countries and materially lower prices.
And you've been on the record of saying that the implementation of a code, as you now understand it, would add $1 billion to the cost of food.
I think there is a risk that it could add, well, I gave you a specific example of how it could add $750 million, to the cost of food, and that's inside our enterprise alone. So $1 billion is a broad and meaningful number. It's certainly not too high.
I've been in business myself. I have no issue with profit. Your concern is your relationship with some of the big manufacturers, your profit margins, and again, I have no issue with profit. The discussion might be around how much, 32.3% versus 30.7% gross margin increase over the pandemic. So be it. If the goal here is to stabilize grocery prices, it must come from a relative adjustment of profits or an address of the costs in the system. What are the costs in the system? And I guess I'm going to go back to that 32.3%, the fines and fees that your suppliers have had to pay. Is that included in that gross margin? Or is it accounted for elsewhere in the margins in your distribution centers?
I don't know precisely the answer of where it's accounted for. I can tell you this, though. As I've said before, when we have compliance charges built into the business, they're based on a very specific, set of criteria. We make exceptions, to those criteria more often, than the other way around. And those compliance charges have decreased by nearly 50% over the last 24 months.
You would not charge a compliance fee where you've asked for a pre-order of 1,000 units, then upped it to 5,000,
No.
and then a short delivery. So that is categorically, there will be no compliance charges in that situation.
Categorically, no compliance charges. At least that's what has been the way it's been explained to me.
As has been requested of other CEOs, would you table Loblaws, fines, and fees collected with this committee? During the past period.
I don't know.
Others have committed to do so.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, going back to how do we address prices? I mean, profits, relative profits is one matter. The costs in the system is what I'm hearing you say. And I think that's what we're all looking for, is where can we do that? Other costs in the system. You operate distribution networks. Carbon tax is obviously one of those areas. Do you have an estimate of what your costs to the carbon tax would be?
No, we don't, and part of the reason for that is that we don't pay, the carbon tax based on where we are in the value chain, in terms of, any impact on food. So I can't speak with any, real knowledge about that subject. Although I've no doubt that anything that increases the cost, puts cost pressure in the system, is something that we should be looking at.
Who does pay the carbon tax then?
So the carbon tax is paid by emitters, as I understand it, throughout the system. And if you are an emitter, you have to pay a carbon tax.
So if that carbon tax was not in the system, that would not lower costs to consumers?
I don't know how it would work, but certainly, we have a global challenge, when it comes to carbon emissions, and so we have to balance, the present in terms of economic development and affordability, and also tackling this global challenge.
So it is that carbon tax is charged throughout the entire system right now, other than the direct fuel used on the farm. So who eats that on the way up if we're supposed to not pass that along to consumers?
I can't speak to that. I think everybody has an opportunity to get more efficient, look for ways to do that. And certainly in our case, we're trying to lower prices, and reduce the amount of energy that we consume in the enterprise.
Thank you, Mr. Epp, and thank you, Mr. Weston. You will still have 5 more minutes, so you can continue that line of questioning if you'd like. Mr. Carr, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Weston. As best as possible, if you could try to answer with a yes or no mindset, that would be greatly appreciated. My first question is, do you believe that if you sign a grocery code of conduct that your personal profit margin will decrease, yes or no?
I don't know. Our focus, entirely has been on, is this going to improve, the cost of groceries, or is it likely to increase the cost of groceries? And I think you understand how we see it.
Are you concerned that your personal profit margin may decrease if a code of conduct is signed?
No.
I note that in the financials from Loblaw that were made public recently, $1.3 billion on stock buybacks occurred. Now, it's well known that stock buybacks are a way in which investors and executives have the ability to drive up their own shares and the value of those shares. Do you believe it would be reasonable, therefore, with the profit that you and colleagues have generated by virtue of stock buybacks, to pass those savings on to consumers? Or do you believe that it is reasonable, as per Mr. McGregor's question, that as your personal profit margin continues to increase, that is simply reasonable, I believe was the word you used, or justified within the context of your overall profit?
Thank you for the question. Loblaw reinvests over 100% of its earnings back in this country in capital. New stores, new infrastructure, the jobs are not capital. So when we look at it, we are investing substantially more, back in the country than we are taking out. That's a good benchmark, for whether, our capital allocation strategy is balanced or imbalanced. And, we will continue to invest more in this country because we see significant opportunity, here for us to do so.
Do you believe that the expectations that Canadians have placed on you, according to a poll released by Abacus this morning, roughly 75% supportive of a code of conduct, is unfair? So I'll repeat the question. Do you believe that the expectations that Canadians have of you, 75% of them, are unfair?
I think the expectation that Canadians have on us and on the value chain in food collectively is to find ways to lower food prices, and I think that's an entirely reasonable expectation. And our only concern with the Code of Conduct is the way that it's currently drafted creates risk of the opposite happening. That is something I think everybody should be very concerned about. And all we're asking for is a really good, honest look at this. And that's why we provided the material to this committee today, so that you would have it in front of you and you could look at it yourselves and understand that what we're saying, is true and it is a reasonable risk. We will sign a code that doesn't, raise the cost of groceries for consumers.
You said earlier in your opening remark, or perhaps it was in response to one of the primary questions at the beginning, that the deal was one-sided, the current grocery code of conduct as presented. How could it be characterized as one-sided if three of your main competitors believe that they are in a position to move forward with it as is?
So the way the code is drafted, and this is in section 2.5, manufacturers are not required to enter into written agreements with retailers setting out the commercial terms of their relationship. They don't have to do that. And despite this, we do. We have to enter into a contract, which is this code of conduct. That is in itself one-sided and imbalanced. These are the kinds of things that we just want this code to adjust for. Okay. Everybody should be required to enter into an agreement and be held accountable for the terms of that agreement. How can you write a contract that way?
That's satisfactory. I'd like to get one more question in, please. And that is, can you speak to the role that climate change is having on the cost of food, specifically when there are floods, droughts, other changes that are apparent in the climate, how that is impacting cost of groceries and therefore what you believe you have to pass on to consumers as a result?
So we are at time. Mr. Weston, if you want to make that very quick. If not, we do have 5 minutes coming back to the Liberals, and Mr. Carr, you can just kind of prompt Mr. Weston again, or very quickly, Mr. Weston.
Just say there are meaningful impacts, that we are managing, throughout the value chain on a, call it, weekly basis.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Parent, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weston, I'm trying to understand all of this. Earlier you said that the best possible way to proceed would be for everybody to sign on to the code. And then you said that you were ejected, or rather excluded, from the steering committee and from the working group. According to what I've found out, you just weren't there. Has your company ever participated in the committees that are elaborating the code? Yes or no?
Well, certainly we have a team, two particular executives, three actually, who have been actively involved in discussions about the code. All I've said was that we were not on the working committee. We have had the opportunity to provide our feedback, and that feedback, was not accepted.
Donc la réponse est non, vous n'avez pas été au comité de...
So the answer is no, you were not at the working group nor at the steering committee. Earlier, you mentioned that since you have a chain that has rebates, you can't get involved. But Metro is ready to get involved, even though they have a grocery store that is cheaper, which is Super C. How do you justify that?
I've never said that we couldn't get involved. I've just said there are 4 elements of the code and the way that it's drafted, that we believe should be adjusted. And we have put forward what we consider to be very reasonable solutions, that we think can achieve the best of both worlds. All we're asking for is the ability to engage in that discussion in a constructive way.
Merci. Quand on s'était vu là, au mois de mars,
When you were here in March, I asked all 5 company CEOs to provide the profit numbers. All 5 said they can't because they are in competition with one another. So I asked all 5 if they would commit to providing that information to the Competition Bureau. I thought I understood that all 5 had agreed. Unfortunately, what we've seen, or what the Competition Bureau has brought back to us, is that it's been challenging to get those numbers. Can you tell us if Loblaws provided those numbers that were asked for by the Competition Bureau?
Yes, we provided it before this committee, 6 months ago, and so, yeah, we've been fully supportive of what they've asked for and given them everything that we could.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weston, the Code of Conduct Industry Group's response to your company was pretty scathing. They said that contrary to your claims, there was no evidence to suggest the code will either raise food prices or negatively impact the ability of retailers to meet consumer demand. And they said, if anything, all the available evidence actually shows that it will curb grocery price inflation. I'm just wondering, is your apprehension about the code more due to the fact that you think it's going to actually hurt Loblaw's bottom line instead of negatively impacting consumers? Because they've kind of laid out a fairly substantial case here to refute everything that you've said so far.
Yeah, I guess it's we have data, they have data. Our data is pretty compelling on this front, and we have laid it out in very specific terms. I don't believe that others have done it in quite the same way. And so, we believe our data is right. It's, it takes a little bit of courage, to stand in the way of something like this. And as I said, we're not trying to stop it. We're just trying to find ways to modify it, to reduce risk. I've had outreach from multiple manufacturers who have said explicitly, that they applaud the courage and that they agree that this code has the potential to increase food prices.
Thank you. And I just want to go back to my earlier intervention with you on food bank usage. I've asked this question to Mr. Medline, to Mr. Gabera. Just the fact that, we do have firm evidence that many of your employees are struggling to make ends meet, and some are using food banks. And I think that it's very relevant when we're discussing food price inflation to also look at the examples that various companies are setting. So for this company, do you have a number or any interest as a CEO of the number of your employees that are actually having to access a food bank? Because this directly speaks to your ability to pay a living wage.
So food prices are the most important reason that we're here today. And I can tell you that Loblaw believes wholeheartedly in fair pay. We offer some of the most competitive wages in the industry. The fact remains that a large portion of our colleague base is part-time. And the reason they're part-time is because shoppers don't shop all the way throughout the day. They shop in the evening and they shop on the weekends. And so we need to have people working in the evenings and working on weekends. They need to be part-time shifts, part-time jobs. Part-time jobs, tend to have wage rates that are closer to minimum wage. As you know, we have a minimum wage system in across the provinces that is now is indexed to inflation. Since 2019, minimum wage has increased over 20%, and our pay in our unionized labor force, which is the substantive portion of our employees, has increased commensurately, with that minimum wage increase. And so, look, there's always opportunity, but we need to make sure that we're a productive and efficient, organization. And we've got to do it while making sure that we're paying absolutely the right wages for the industry. If you took our average wage as an enterprise, it's over $19 an hour, and that is regarded as a general, statement as in line with a living wage.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Now, colleagues, we're getting close to time, but Mr. Weston has taken his time to be here. I don't want to utilize or not use the full time, so we can extend for 15 minutes, and I'm going to. So, Ms. Rood, you go ahead. Then we have Ms. Taylor-Roy, and I'll have a few questions for Mr. Weston at the end. Go ahead, Ms. Rood. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Weston, for actually being here in person. It's nice to have you sitting at the table to talk to one-on-one. On the fines and fees, just to clarify my colleague's point, could you table the total for 2023 of the fines and fees paid? Just going to throw that out there. Now, earlier you talked about front-of-pack labeling and how it's going to cost $8 billion, and you also said that the government's new P2 plastics ban on food packaging will cost $6 billion. Will that cost be passed on to consumers and increase the price of food? Will it lead to food waste and impact food availability?
So I don't think I said that that front-of-pack labeling would cost $8 billion. I don't have a number for what that would cost. On the P2, it's $6 billion. And yes, all of these costs, are cost pressures that are likely to end up, being paid by consumers. And I would just remind the committee again that the reason for that is that if you have an increase on 78 or 80% of your cost of good, of your cost of your business model, and your profit is 2% or 3%, then we are forced into a situation where we have to pass through a lot of these cost increases.
So ultimately, consumers will pay more for fresh food if this plastics ban were to go ahead.
I believe so, yes.
Do you, in your opinion, the imposed timeline that the Liberal government has on this plastic ban, is it a realistic goal?
So Loblaw, as I mentioned before, leads the way in terms of plastic packaging reduction, and we work with a lot of manufacturers on innovation in this space. We think it will be very, very difficult to achieve the current timelines as laid out.
The government has threatened grocers with an excess profits tax if food prices don't stabilize by the beginning of 2024. And today's food prices report says that food inflation won't stabilize and an average family will pay $700 more next year. Will a grocer tax lower food prices for Canadians?
No, I don't believe that it will.
Thank you. When you were here last spring before this committee, I did bring to your attention some of the unfair practices and fines that your company was charging our farmers and producers specifically. And at that time, you said you would review those practices. So I'm just wondering, has your company made any changes into the way you're treating farmers and small suppliers?
Well, we certainly have. The introduction of the small supplier program is probably the most public, indication of that. The feedback that we've received from small suppliers and manufacturers has been extremely positive, and we're continuing to look for ways to do that. And we are in the midst of a review of our compliance charges to make sure that they are fair and justifiable. And this is why I know that our fees are down, nearly 50% this year, I think is the number. And we apply very transparent, and stringent, standards in terms of when those charges apply. I think we believe there's an opportunity to provide more transparency on this, so that manufacturers understand, so that they don't come as a surprise. And we think it's the surprise, that is the biggest issue here, and that if we can resolve that, a lot of this frustration will likely go away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Mr. Lahou.
Merci, Madame Rood.
Thank you, Ms. Rood. Mr. Weston, I will continue in the same line of questioning as Ms. Rood. Right now, we are looking at $5 billion that were paid in fines by various suppliers. Can you explain the following? How do you determine the terms between yourself and the suppliers? The future of the code of conduct would have a very important impact on that, because $5 billion, that's a lot of money. So how are you setting those penalties? Can we see the models that you're using?
I'll certainly take that away, and it might very well be helpful to share some of that. So I don't know where the $5 billion number comes from in terms of this. Is certainly not our number. And as I've said before, in terms of our compliance charges, they are down substantially over the last couple of years. And, as vendor service levels continue to improve, we expect that number to continue to decline.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Thank you, Mr. Liu. Ms. Taylor-Roy, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Weston, for being here in person again. Appreciate it. And there's so many questions I could ask you. But one of the things I want to talk about is the measures that our government is taking to address long-term issues in our country. Things around, for example, the P2 plastics. And obviously fighting climate change, as you've mentioned, increased cost of groceries has been driven a great deal. In fact, we heard last time that one of the stores expects orange juice to go up by 38% because of the climate impacts on crops in different countries. And I know it's the job of business to focus on short-term profit and shareholder value. It's the job of government to think about larger issues and not necessarily the short term. So in the Environment Committee, on which I sit right now, we are studying clean water. And there's a lot of concern about microplastics in the water and the effect of that on human health. Of course, that has a huge impact on healthcare costs, on long term. And I appreciate the fact that you are working on solutions to this as a major, user of plastics. I'm wondering if, we have to balance putting in ambitious goals to kind of motivate people and ask people to make changes versus looking at the impacts on companies. So you said that you didn't think the timeline of 2.5 years was reasonable to come up with a solution. You've been working on this for a while. The industry has known about our ambition, our desire to protect Canadians' health by making these changes. Why do you think there have not been a solution, and when do you see that coming?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I would say, we are a family business. Our family's been in this business for 4 generations, so we think about the long term as well. It's why we're so ambitious in our net zero carbon targets. It's why I co-chair a global effort for the retailers and manufacturing industry to find ways to reduce plastic waste across the industry. We have over $2 trillion worth of sales in manufacturing and retail committed, to what we call the golden design rules for reducing plastic waste. We're big advocates of extended producer responsibility, which has been innovated here in Canada. And we believe that system design change is ultimately going to lead to the most effective results. And so we have to work really closely with the environmental ministry at the provincial level and the federal level to make sure that we are putting in policies that are achievable and that are actually going to deliver a constructive benefit. And this P2 has great ambition, and it's a great ambition, but it's not easy to execute. In fact, I think I would say it's impossible to execute in this time frame. And so, how much longer do we need? I don't know the answer, but I can tell you this: I'm really encouraged by the level of momentum that the industry has globally on this subject, and so I think we're going to get it.
Well, I'd love to hear if you can find out from people working on this in your company some feedback on what's being done exactly and when you think it is. The other area I wanted to talk about was the price on pollution program. As you've said, you're committed to a net zero carbon target. Clearly, you believe there's a climate crisis, as we do. And the price on pollution is often referred by the opposition as the reason for high food prices. However, there's many countries where there is no price on pollution and food prices are higher than here, or food inflation has been higher. This is a market-based approach. With our climate action incentive rebate we give to Canadians, most Canadians get back more than they pay. In fact, the most recent study showed that 93% of households making under $50,000 get back more than they pay. And it is an efficient way to try and address missions as you're doing in your net zero target. What are your opinions on programs such as this that we're trying to change consumer behavior where there are alternatives and using a tool like this, a market-based tool, to fight climate change?
In about 30 seconds, Mr. Weston.
Yes, I absolutely think that that market-based solutions are an essential part of how to change economic behavior and consumer behavior over time. We're in a difficult spot, because we're now trying to manage the cost of living, against long-term incentives to change behavior. And I think we have to continue to work on ways to do both.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Mr. Weston, I'll exercise just a few minutes for a few questions. I'll try to move as quickly as possible. Look, part of your opening statement was about the code of conduct not necessarily driving grocery prices down. I would agree with you on that we have to be very transparent about what the code does and doesn't do. We can't be telling Canadians that a grocery code of conduct is going to result in huge drop in prices, but this committee also has an obligation to the supply chain and to the farmers that actually provide the products into your stores. And you talked about your concern about how the prices would go up. I'm looking at a graph from Dr. Charlebois, who laid out price increases over 10 years in countries that had a code versus those that didn't. I take notice that there's a lot that goes into food price. But I want to dig into what you provided this committee specifically. You mentioned at clause 2.5, and I want to read it for the benefit of everyone. For the purposes of the code, an agreement is anything that defines the material elements of a relationship between commercial parties. They can include contracts, invoices, purchase orders, bills of lading, emails, and other forms of mutually agreed material that memorializes an understanding between the parties. Now, I practiced law for a short period of time. I might not have the experience of some of your corporate lawyers at Loblaws, but if you have an email or a bill of lading or some type of payment, then surely there would have been some discussion about the price of which the product was going to be charged. I can appreciate it wouldn't be an ironclad commercial agreement that you might be seeking, but I think about a farmer in my own riding that might be providing produce for you. One of your agents at Loblaw says, look, we'll buy tomatoes at X amount. Would that not, I mean, that is a contract. So what is it specifically? Because you talk about negotiating in good faith. Those are examples of at least commercial agreement between your company and a supplier. Why is that not good enough for you? Like, why is that problematic, that code specifically? Because you talk about negotiating in good faith. What explicitly don't, if there was an invoice or a purchase order, there would have been some conversation about what the terms would be, maybe not as exclusive or as high-end as a big manufacturer, food manufacturer, but why is that so problematic for you?
The issue is the imbalance. I think our view is that if there's an expectation that a retailer enters into a set of detailed contract terms, that a manufacturer should have the same responsibility, so that we all have the same piece of paper that says these are the terms that we've agreed and this is the basis on which we should conduct business. And the way that the code reads in the specific language from our perspective is that it holds the retailer to a higher standard than the manufacturer. And as a result, those manufacturers can come and change the cost or refuse to accept, changes in business terms, and we are unable to do the same thing. So all we've asked for is for us to balance that equation out, so that both sides, are responsible for adhering to the same set of standards.
And you have here, it's only fair that a supplier should be able to enjoy the benefits of the code only if it has written into a written agreement with a retailer setting out the commercial terms. But isn't that the whole idea of the code, Mr. Weston, that we actually provide some fundamentals? Because I can appreciate when you're negotiating with Pepsi, those are two different conversations. But the idea of the code here, and you admitted it in your own testimony, for smaller food manufacturers or suppliers directly, this is about creating some transparency and some elements that they can hold on to. So I guess I'll ask the question, is there an idea that you could actually have larger manufacturers not be necessarily subject to this, and this would apply for smaller food processors? Like what is it? Because I can appreciate if you're negotiating with Pepsi, that relationship is different than if you're negotiating with a farmer in my riding. Why is it that if they're just simply trying to lay out principles that you would negotiate with, somehow that's contravention to the business practices that would be expected in this country.
Yeah, so as we've said before, the principles, in the code, particularly around your point, which is, how do we improve the relationship between retailers and manufacturers, are absolutely sound. Our concern is in the drafting itself that it creates these vulnerabilities that create this risk. And you're absolutely right. We see the biggest risk here, in the way that the code is drafted, in manufacturers who are very, very much bigger, than the Canadian retailers, exploiting the way that it's drafted at the expense of the Canadian consumer.
Last thing I'll ask just very quickly is around, you mentioned about filling orders, and you go out to consumers and say, look, we're going to have this product at this price, and then you said food manufacturers not providing the product that you expected. We've heard instances, both privately and I think even before this committee, of the idea that there would be significant fines if someone only provided 98.5% of the expected product delivery. What in your mind is a reasonable tension there? If you ask for 50,000 units of a certain product and they come in at 98.5%, is it reasonable that a food retailer should be able to impose that? I appreciate you want certainty. I do understand that, Mr. Weston, but there are circumstances where that can actually add to the food costs through the entire supply chain and then get passed on to consumers. So what is a reasonableness? Because when I look at the actual provision, there's the talk that there's a reasonableness clause in here such that you couldn't impose unless they really significantly did not meet their order in a way that would be egregious under commercial terms.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Reasonableness, is one of the areas that we are focused on in terms of opportunities to enhance the code. I think our perspective is that if we can modify it in such a way that, that the necessary practices that allow the retailer, in our case, let's say as an example, to hold a manufacturer accountable, remains in position. And there are reasonableness thresholds that we can all sort of agree to. That if they break beyond that reasonableness threshold, or they're unjustified in some way, then there can be some consequence or some form of resolution. So you're talking exactly about what we're talking about, and I think maybe there's just a disagreement about whether the drafting, as it currently stands, actually accommodates, this reasonableness factor the way it needs to.
Would you like to provide this committee any sense of what that threshold would be for you, whether or not for large food manufacturers or smaller? Is that 95%? Is it 90%? Like, do you have any thoughts in your mind, or have you provided anything into the government on that?
It's a little bit complicated because that calculation is done on a 12-week average, not on sort of an individual moment in time. So 98% in that context suggests that there's absolutely no room for error, whereas in fact, there is. And remember, these are quantities that are agreed, up front. So if somebody says, "Oh, I agree to give you this, 100 products," and you don't give that 100 products, that is a challenge. And so when you're making exceptions, 60% of the time, I think it suggests reasonableness on the part of the retailer. But it also may suggest that, okay, if we're having that many exceptions, maybe the algorithm, has an opportunity to be improved, and that's something that we're working on right now.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for indulging a few lines of questions. Thank you to our translators for extending a little bit. And thank you, Mr. Weston, for being here. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Colleagues, we will be back on Monday. We have Mr. Laflèche coming from Metro for the first hour, and then we have CPMA, Association Maraîcher du Québec, and we have the Centre for the Future of Work. That'll be what we do on Monday. Enjoy your weekend, colleagues. Meeting adjourned.